Fantastic. Well, then let's go ahead and get started. Once again, just want to say thank you for attending today's Flexi webinar, for taking the time to come learn more about Flexi. Today, Aaron Clapp will be your presenter, and he'll be talking about how to create a color profile, which, as you may know, will allow you to get your prints looking nice and get your color matching done. And Aaron knows everything there is to know about Flexi. He's worked in our export field and fixing problems, and now he is director of all our training here at SAI. And so he knows Flexi inside out and backwards. So if you have any questions about Flexi, we will have a question and answer portion after his presentation. So you can ask any questions either about color profiles or about anything else, and he'll do his best to answer as many of those as we can. And we will be recording today's webinar. So if you have to step out or you'd like to share it with someone else, we will be sending you an email with the link to the recording. We'll upload that to our YouTube channel. And I think that's everything. So we'll turn it over to Aaron.
All right. Okay, so color profile. So we kind of want to just get into the real basics of what's the process of doing this and kind of what are the tools that you need and then kind of just walking through the steps one by one so that you guys can have a good idea as to what you need to do when you get into color profiling here with Flexi. And so this is kind of to give you a little bit of a taste or to kind of get your feet wet with this so that it doesn't seem quite so intimidating once you get into it. Also be aware, I think I did a live session on this with way more detail as well. It was more like an hour long. So if you're interested in that, you can go to our YouTube channel and check that out. It goes into a little bit more detail, but there's that available as well. We will also be sending you out a PDF. Now, this PDF was made quite a while ago, but the menus have not changed. The profiler is basically the same, and the process is the same. So we really haven't changed much because there's not really much change within the creating of ICC profiles in a long time. So we've added new features and things like that, but everything you need to know is covered in here. So let's get started. So first of all, in order to create a color profile, you're going to have a color reading device. So let me just pull up an image here and pull it on screen. So you're going to need something like this. This is an I1, this is an X-Rite I1 device. You'll need one of these. They have all kinds of them out there. You've got the Barbieris, which are the nice expensive ones that do everything automatically for you. You've got the semi-automatic ones that have, static sheets that pull the material down. There's all kinds. So there's simple ones like this one where it's more of a manual, and these are the cheaper ones. And then there's the more expensive ones if you get into more automation, where you're doing profiles a lot, where the extra money spent on them is worth it if you're doing a ton of profiles. So you'll need one of these, at least by the minimum. You might be able to purchase one used, or you might be able to get a new one, or you might even be able to rent one or borrow one from a local distributor for your supplies. So it depends on where you're at. You might be able to get a hold of one of these and maybe borrow it or something like that. So that's going to be the first thing, is you're going to need this. And of course, you're going to need Flexi, and then you're going to need a large format printer. Those are kind of obvious ones, but figure we'd mention them. But we have the production manager open. I've got several different devices here. I'm going to jump right into the color profiler, and we're going to take a look at some of these settings. So I'm going to go to the setup menu and click on color profiler. That's going to bring up this screen right here. And this is going to give us a choice of several things that we can do. We can create a linearization chart, convert an old preset, create a new profile, modify a profile that we've already started, or relinearize an existing profile. We're going to start from fresh and just create a brand new ICC profile. And then as we go through, I'm actually going to go to the modify, resume, and just show you guys some of the results that were created based on another profile that was already done. Relinearize is basically an option that we use for taking an existing profile and just recalibrating it a little bit for something that's changed on the printer. Maybe some print heads are changed, or something has happened, or maybe a new ink set, or perhaps maybe the time of year. If you want to profile for winter versus summer, that kind of thing. So you can take the bones of a profile and then just kind of relinearize it or reset it up so that you're not recreating the whole thing. So let's start out by creating an ICC profile. So click on this option, and pardon me, this stuff always flies off screen, so I'll have to drag some of this stuff over, but I'll make sure to bring it all over for you guys. All right, so this is our first step, and this is where we are going to decide what kind of device that we need to print with, and what kind of paper we're going to be using, what kind of settings. So I'm gonna go with this one because this is the one that we've used here frequently in our office. And we're going to choose our print quality mode. And you'll notice that the resolution is kind of fixed. That's because technically every profile should have their own resolution. You shouldn't be taking a 1440 by 1440 and then changing the resolution to 720 by 720. That really doesn't work. The software is not going to stop you. Let's just put it that way. When you go to print, you will be able to change the print resolution, but the profile wasn't really designed for that, so you may end up with color issues. So in this case, you'll see that the resolution is going to be locked in, and I can change the resolution by changing these variables here. So we've got some basic generic ones here, so quality 1, quality 2, and they have different settings. So quality 4 has a 720 by 1440, and then we've got some custom ones here, so you can kind of take a look at these. These range from 32 passes, which are very high quality, slow prints, to something that's a quick 8 passes, 720 by 720. This will get you through a lot of stuff real quick. So depends on what you're doing with the print, and depending on who's going to view it and where they're going to view it from, will depend on what you select as your quality. There is no reason why you need to print 1440 by 1440 if you're going to put this sign up on the top of a building where it's going to be seen from no closer than 20 or 30 feet. So you can sacrifice on a little bit of quality because no one's going to see it up close. That'll allow you to save ink and charge the customer less because you're using, say half or less of ink. So kind of figure out what you're going to do with this, what it's for, how you're going to be using it. That'll determine your quality. Then we just decide our color mode. So, we can go from CMYK to light cyan, light magenta. We can do CMYK white and metallic. So we've got all kinds of options in here. We even have an RGB option for this printer. We also have, it looks like light cyan, light black, and another option, LLK. So we've got several different options here. So we can choose, for now, we'll just choose the light cyan, light magenta with the CMYK. And I'm going to go ahead and stick to the enhanced stochastic 2. That's one of my, these two are going to be your typical ones that we use. There are definitions for each and every one of these. If you go to the en-route knowledge or the Flexi knowledge base. In fact, you can kind of see that over here in the resources. You've got that knowledge base. If you click on that knowledge base and search dither types, you can find out what each dither type is good for and what its pros and what its cons are. Again, typically the enhanced stochastic 2, they're kind of the more well-rounded ones that you typically will use nowadays. But depending on what you're doing, you may want to change to something else. And each one, like I said, has its pros and cons. Based on the situation of what you're doing and what you're printing, you're going to want to change that to customize that. Then you have your driver options. Now this is going to be your heater settings and things like that. we'll kind of get into this later, but the material that you're using will dictate dryer time and a lot of this stuff. So for the most part, I typically will use the printer default unless there's a specific reason why I think I need not to. So for example, if you need to set up your heater options in here, you would check this option so that you can change these. And these will really be kind of important because it will allow you to, here in a minute when we look at it, adjust how much ink you can put down. So know that these are here. We can change some of this stuff or we can leave it as default depending on what we want to do. Then we have a display name. This is going to be something that comes up as a media display number inside or a name inside of Flexi. But the actual ICC profile name that you're going to see in terms of when it shows up in your list of profiles is going to be this right here. So you want to make some kind of constructive or useful thing to go in here. So I can say maybe this is 3M IJ 180 720, and this maybe we say Q4 for quality 4, and then I can say something like this is going to be my all-round profile or whatever. You know, name it something that makes sense to you so that when you look at that profile, you know what it's about or you know what it's for or something like that. So now what I'm going to do is at this point, we're going to go to the next step. But the next step is blank for us. It's kind of already been filled, or this is the default setting. I'm actually going to stop right here. Now you would normally follow these steps. I'm going to actually go back for a second. And I'm going to open up an existing ICC profile so that we can kind of see what somebody did to a profile as we walk through the different steps. So I'm going to open up my color profiler, hit modify, and I have some profiles here on the desktop that I'm going to use. And we'll use this one for example. Now this is going to give me an error message because this is a really old profile that I pulled off of my hard drive. So it's just saying that this profile was made with an SSO Diffusion, which is no longer compatible with the RIP. We can update it, and what it does, it converts it to Enhanced Stochastic 2. So we're just going to do that real quick and move on there. All right. So let's pull our thing over here. Okay. So this is the end of the profile. I'm going to click here. So here we are at our ink. This is our second step, our ink limit test. So essentially what it does is it will print this little ink chart down here. And if you have light cyan, light magenta, it'll also print those as well. And essentially what we're doing here is we're going to let the printer print it, and then we're going to look at the quality of what we see here on screen. What we're going to do is we're going to look at these individual boxes and make sure that they look crisp and clean and full of color. So we want to try and be as close as we can to 100 as physically possible. Now, this will kind of determine what our color gamut is for this profile. So you can see on the left-hand side here, they've set their ink limits here. And so the way that we're going to look at this is we want to get the maximum color. So we inspect it visually, and the aim or the goal is to stay as close to 100% on all 4 colors as possible. But the things that we want to look for on the patches is not only does it need to be dry, but you also need to have it be crisp and clear. So it needs to look like this left example over here, not this one. Not only that, but you're going to be looking for what we call matting, which is basically slightly undried ink on the surface. If you see that, your values need to go down a little bit. Now, you don't want to go too low. We don't want to be too low because then that removes the color gamut for your printer. Now this profile here, I don't know who created it, but it seems like these are fairly low. You know, again, I don't know this material. This could be material that does not absorb very well, and so we need to just go with it. But we could maybe increase the heat, the preheater, or perhaps the heat on the platen as we create this profile, and maybe that would allow us to get a higher ink limit. Because remember, the lower the ink limit value, the less color gamut that you have. So you don't want to go too far. Essentially what we're looking for is we're looking for the sweet spot where the color no longer gets any different, or it doesn't get any darker, or it doesn't get any different, but then the saturation just starts to overwhelm. That's what we're looking for. So once we get to that point, we can go to step number 3, which is printing a limitation or a limit verification. What this does is it just says, okay, now that you've entered in your ink limit values, what we're going to do is we are going to verify that to make sure that it's still okay. And if it still looks good, then we can confirm. If you need to make further adjustments, you can do that. Now, one other thing that you want to notice here is that, for example, between the cyan, magenta, and the yellow, there's not a huge disparity. So we're within 10 to 15%. You do not want to go 55 on one, 80 on another, 45 on another, and then 75 on another. That's too far. The black is a little bit different in this case, but we want to keep them fairly close. Otherwise, you'll have some weird color issues. So that's pretty simple. We get past that. We set up our ink limits. And then this is where, if you're using light cyan, light magenta, you're going to set up your light magenta and light cyan optimization curves. And so essentially what we're doing here is we will print an ink split limit test. And basically what we're looking for is that the colors, as it shifts from light cyan to darker cyan or the regular cyan colors, there's not like a big shift. That's what we're trying to avoid. And so this is a very classic example of what you want your light cyan and your regular cyan chart to look like. You want the light cyan to peak at the beginning, and then you don't want your dark cyan or your regular cyan to start until 10 or 15%. So you can see here that it starts probably about 8% or so, but that's right about where the light cyan is at its highest. And then as we pick up the regular cyan colors, then our light cyan tends to fade off. We want a nice smooth curve here. And if we have a curve that looks like this, when we go to print our print ink limit split test, you're going to see a very smooth transition from light cyan to dark or regular cyan. The thing that you're looking for is if this chart is out of whack or something's not right or the chart's way off, what'll happen is you'll have really good light cyan colors, and then all of a sudden something will happen, and all of a sudden, boom, you have like a dark color. You don't want that kind of a shift when you print this test. You're looking for a nice, smooth transition, and that's kind of what you're looking for. If you do not have light cyan or light magenta or any of those options, this chart will just simply not appear. So when you choose your color mode, it actually just deletes this step. So if you don't have those, you don't even have to worry about it because it won't be included in your step process. So if we hit next, once we've hit our ink limits and we've kind of figured out our charts there, we can go to linearization. This is where we're going to set up our device. So you'll come in here and you'll set up one of your devices, and these are all the ones that we support. So we've got the Barbieris, we've got some of the latex ones that are actually included on the HPs. We have some of the ones that are included on the Mutos, and then a lot of the X-Rite devices. It'll be important to install the USB drivers for these devices. So, for example, when I was doing a color profile with this new laptop a while ago, I had to go to X-Rite's website, download the USB drivers for the i1, install them properly before it would even work. So note that you have to do that before you even get anywhere. Once you've set up your device, you choose your increment size. I always go with enhanced, just because it's the biggest chart. The bigger the chart that you can do, the better, really, because it gets you a more accurate profile. And then based on the device that you choose, it'll allow you to choose different size swatches. So full are larger patches, and then A3 are smaller, and the A4 is probably the smallest. Depending on how much material you want to use on this, I would just go with the smallest. The A4 in this case, it works. Some of them may not give you this choice because if you're running like a Barbieri or one of the others, it may lock you into a specific size. So then this is where we start measuring. So when you measure, I'm just going to kind of pull up another image here real quick. You're going to do something like this. If you have your basic I1, it's going to print out a swatch that looks something like this. And you're going to use this little plastic device to slide your device back and forth across the colors. And that's how we're going to read it. So you're just going to hit the scan button or the measure button here, and it prints this chart as you see it in a long, kind of a tall, long chart. So you'll just scan these back and forth as you go through, and it will place the colors in here. Now, what we're looking for here is we are looking for colors to somewhat match up. So pinks with pink, yellow with yellow, this gray with gray, black with black. What we don't want to see is we don't want to see a pink color in the yellow slot. So if you look at the, for example, A1, B1, C1, these are the shades of the color. So if we go here, we see this one is a Q1 is a shade of color. We're looking to make sure that the color up top somewhat matches the color below, which blue with blue is what we're looking for. Now, in this case, they look a little bit different, but that's okay. We're just making sure that it's not a pink color in a blue spot. That will throw off your profile like crazy and cause all kinds of issues. So we scan this in. We just want to take a brief look at it, just kind of scroll through here, just look at this and say, okay, do all of them match up? Okay, they look good, looks good. I can verify this now by clicking on my linearization curve. So after I've scanned everything, click on my linearization curve, and I can take a look at this curve and see what it looks like. Now, what I'm looking for is weird jumps up and down. So, for example, I would not want to see this spike down or spike up, or this line, I don't want to see it in a jagged way. So we're looking for a somewhat smooth curve for all the colors. And you can kind of see if we pull up here the black and all the other cyan, magenta, and yellow, we're looking for a smooth curve. Now, there are some issues up here on the top end. Looks like we've got a little bit of a dive here. This profile is probably not perfect, but the idea is here. This is a fairly decent profile where as we look at this curve, it's somewhat smooth, it's not super jagged, and this looks decent. So this is kind of our verification. We say, okay, great. If we see something like that, then that means we either need to go back to our ink limits or we need to come back in our chart here and verify that something didn't get scanned incorrectly. If something did get scanned incorrectly, the nice thing is that you can select that particular swatch and just rescan it. So I can rescan one swatch, or I can rescan a whole row, or whatever. So if there's a mistake there, you don't have to rescan the whole thing. We can just simply come back and scan this up right here. So now that we've got our linearization chart, that's going to start the basic profile build for our next step. From here on, basically the steps are just kind of identical. Now what we're going to do is we go to a multi-ink limit test. The multi-ink limit test basically includes different colors. So we're going to mix cyan plus magenta, cyan plus yellow, magenta plus yellow. We're going to do all these combinations and then print them out. And then we're going to look for the same types of things. We want to make sure that these, again, don't go overboard. What you're visually looking for, again, is if you don't see any density difference, go with the lower number. This will save you some ink down later. So if you look at the two colors and they look exactly the same and the sharpness is exactly the same, just choose the lower color. There's no sense in creating or using up more ink just to use up more ink. So, if you look at them and they look darn near exact and there's no difference between them, go ahead and just use the lower number. If you do see a color difference, then you want to go with the highest number, because then otherwise you're going to remove color gamut. So when you look at this, you're looking at color difference. You will get to a point where basically the rest of the swatches look the same. There's no point in going to 100 if you don't need to. So kind of use that. And you can see here that they're right about the same. So we look at a lot of them are at 90 or 85%. Again, if you want to verify your settings, then we go ahead and print the multi-ink limit verification, and it'll re-verify what you just printed. So, and it'll put the lowest number as your 100%. So they'll kind of adjust the chart a little bit and make it easier for fine-tuning if you need to get more fine-tuned. Then again, the next step is very similar to the linearization, except for now we're doing characterization. We're going to set up our X-Write device again, and then we're going to start measuring these out. Now you have an option here of different levels of swatches. You've got the 1400, 900, and 432. I would recommend going with the larger number if you can. If you want to sacrifice, the middle one's not a bad middle ground. The small one, again, it's not terrible. It's just depending on the accuracy of color that you need, the more swatches you print is going to be better for you in the long run. So I would recommend going with the 1900 swatches or 1400 swatches, or the 928, depending on what you're doing. It doesn't really take that long once you kind of get the hang of it. 1400 swatches seems like a lot, but it'll only take you 5 or 10 minutes once you kind of get the hang of how to scan and go about it like that. This one was left at 432, so we're going to leave it there for now. And again, once you scan everything through, you kind of want to take a cursory glance through here and just make sure a lot of these match up. Again, greens with greens, you've got purples, you've got blues, you've got yellows, things like that. They all match up perfect. Pinks, light blues. Okay, we look okay. We're going to scroll through here and just kind of visually inspect and make sure that they all look okay. Once that's done and we think everything's good, then we'll hit next. And then this is where we're going to choose some of our last settings inside of our setting. So typically for this particular session, since we're kind of just going over the basics, your black generation, we want to leave that at GCR. And then you want your black to either start at 0% or somewhere below 10%. What this basically does is it moves the position as to where the black point starts, or where the black ink starts printing once it gets into it. Now, I prefer to have the black start earlier. And the reason why is because if you guys have ever printed gray before, if you have to print gray with cyan, yellow, and magenta, your grays can come out really weird colors. So the sooner you start your black, it puts less of a dependency on the printer to have to use the CMY colors to create a gray, which we all know that, if you go 1 or 2% the wrong direction in any way with a CMYK or a CMY gray, that it can very quickly turn pink, or it can very quickly turn blue on you. you have those tinges to it. So my preference is let's start with the black sooner so that it uses more of the black to create the grays than the CMYKs. And then the CMY is just a fill color or kind of to help make it smooth, right? So I usually leave this at 0. I'm going to also leave these settings here for the most part at default. There are a bunch of other options here that we kind of go too much into detail about, but we want the profile size to be large. We also want it to be version 4 and GCR. So those are kind of your main things. Once we set those settings, you're going to take a look at your chart again, and you're going to make sure that everything looks smooth. We do not want jagged drop-offs anywhere, just like what we were looking for in the first section for the linearization chart graphs. We want to make sure that everything is smooth. We don't have any drop-offs. Otherwise, you're going to have color problems. I was having I created a profile the other day for this Muto, and I printed it out, and I ended up actually just making a mistake. I was scanning through my swatches, and one of the swatches misread a color or something, and it actually threw off my entire red section because it read it. I think it took a red and actually scanned it as a blue. Just a mistake, it happens. These machines, maybe it was going too fast or something happened, or maybe I even read this wrong swatch line or something, and it caused a huge problem in my red where my magenta and my magenta would spike down right about 60% and then spiked all the way down to 0 and then spiked back up again. So at that point, I was like, okay, I don't know where the problem is, but I obviously have an issue somewhere with my magenta. And then I go back a couple steps. I can go back and say, okay, now where did my mistake happen? Turns out I had 2 or 3 swatches in these red ones that had red as a different color, and I just had to go back and rescan them. So be aware, this is what you're looking for smooth output. You don't want drastic changes. You want very smooth moving lines from one point to another, as we see here. Once you're done, you will see the generate button. Now this one doesn't appear because I haven't made any changes and it's already been created. Create your new ICC profile, and it'll automatically insert it into the Flexi software so that it shows up in the correct location. So when you go to your printer, you'll see it listed there as one of your print profiles. So as we go through here, we've got when we do this, again, the first couple times that you do this, it's going to be a little slow, a little difficult to do, but some of the key points to remember are during the first couple stages. As you go along, if you're kind of paying attention to what's happening, paying attention to those charts, you'll kind of be able to see some difference. Now, one of the things that I mentioned earlier was when we go to the linearization, our ink limits here, one of the things I mentioned right away is that find out what material that you're using and find out the specifications of it. This is one of the big key points right here because this is the basis off which your entire profile starts. So when we get to this ink limit at the very beginning, it's really important that we nail it right on the head. So when you get to this spot, look up the media that you're profiling for. Find out what the heater settings are for it. What's the max heater temp it can take? What preheater settings should it use? What's the curing temperature? Find out those things from the manufacturer and use those. That'll actually help you get the best out of your material. And you can even go a little bit higher in some cases on the heat. You don't want to go too high. Of course, some materials can melt and they can have other issues when you're doing that. But play around with this. If you find that, for example, in this profile here, Now, obviously, I wasn't here when we created this. These seem low to me. So, maybe one of the things I would have done is let's increase some of the heat a little bit. If we're not at the max already, increase the heat a little bit and see if we can get more. Because the closer to 100 that we are to max, the better it's going to be. So there might be some things you need to adjust, like heater settings and things like that, that can help as you go along through this process. And then just keeping a watchful eye. When we get to these charts, make sure that they're smooth. When we get to here, make sure all the colors match up. Make sure that there's nothing wrong. Look at these linearization curves. Make sure that they're somewhat smooth, that you don't see jagged drop-offs on any of the colors. And as you kind of keep an eye out for those things, that'll help you as you go along and help you get a better profile. Now, you might ask, what kind of profiles should I be creating, and for what types of media? Well, typically you want to create a profile for every material that you're using and every quality that you're using. If you want to get the maximum out of all your profiles, you want to have one profile for every quality. One of the things that you'll notice, I'm going to go ahead and close this for a second. We're going to pull up our Muto here, and I'm going to actually I'm going to open up the default job properties here, and we're going to open up and add these profiles that were on the desktop. Well, let's select them all. It asks us to convert again because these are old profiles, so we'll go ahead and do that. All right. So let's just take this one, for example. If I go in here and I change the quality, you'll notice that this little thing pops up here. This is an indication that says your print mode does not match what's stored in the ICC. So that means that you're using a quality that's not supported by this particular profile. And so it will let you print it, but just be aware that you'll see these little notifications if you're using the wrong quality with the wrong device, or the wrong, not device, but the wrong, the profile has its own setting that it needs for this. So I would need to go back to quality 4 in order for those little warnings to go away. So you should be creating a profile for one for each media. Now, you may, if you have 10 different medias that you use, you might be able to create like a generic profile that works fairly decent on several medias, for medias that maybe you don't use very often. But the medias that you use where color is primarily important, and you need to hit those colors, you need it to look good, you should be creating a profile for each one. Maybe a high quality, or a high quality and a high speed. So one that's super high quality, one that's a little bit higher speed, uses less ink, things like that. So you can kind of diverse and use a profile based on what the print is going to be used for. So typically most sign shops are going to have maybe 3 or 4 different types of material that they print on 90% of the time, and that's what you're going to produce your profiles for. Now, if you really want to get crazy on color correction, I do know some customers and some guys that will relinearize their profiles every 6 months, because they maintain, for example, I know one shop down here that says they do once in the winter and once in the summer, because their shop varies from super hot to super cold. So they're operating within the temperatures of, between 50 and 70, 80 degrees. They keep the building cool, but it's not always possible to keep it exactly the same. So they profile for different times of the year. That's something you can do. You may be able to get away with less, or you may have to do more. It just depends on how well you can keep your environment cooled or heated, and what kind of variations you have from from time to time. You may be able to create a profile, and if you're in an area where the weather really doesn't have that much of a drastic change, one profile might do well for you. Or you may end up having to switch profile. One is a winter, one is a summer profile. So Kind of depends. Honestly, if you go through this process, you will get 10 times better color than using stock profiles that were built from Muto or that were built by somebody else on a different machine, different circumstances, different environment. You might hit a good profile and it may work pretty well, but you might not actually be reaching that prime color gamut that you really need. So with all that, again, I will mention the fact that I have a PDF here that we're going to go ahead and send along an email. If you guys want to get involved in doing this, which I highly recommend that you do, this PDF goes step by step and talks about all the settings. It's got screenshots. It's like a 22-page document. So it'll walk you through step by step the whole process. So if you guys want this, it'll go with the email. You guys can have it and use it to help you get through the color profiles. So at this point, Stuart, let's check and see if we have any questions, and then we'll kind of go from there.
I have one suggestion from Ken. He said, I would love to see a video or webinar color workflow from Flexi to the final print, from how to set the preferences or rendering intent, etc., to matching input profiles to the final print.
You know, that's a good question. If you, there is a couple videos, and we don't have a, we may not have one video that just kind of covers it all, but recently on our Flexi Live YouTube sessions that we've been doing on Wednesdays, there was a couple, I think about a month ago, we did a color trilogy, and then we did a one on profiles as well. So it might be worth checking into those because we talk about rendering intents, we talk about all kinds of stuff in there. It would be really good to go through those, and they are on a playlist on our website. So if you go to our YouTube channel, which I could probably pull that up here, SAI channel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, so if you go to playlists and then workflow Wednesday. So if you click on view full playlist, we've got part 1, 2, and 3 of color, and then we have an hour-long session on how to create a profile. And so those 4 videos, I would say, are going to be really good at going through some of that stuff. So you might check those out. If you still have some questions, and I think there's still probably we might actually do a workflow Wednesday or some video. I think it's a really good idea. I really like your thoughts there. I think we can probably create a video for that, and I think that might help. So that's actually a really good topic. So I will actually think about that and see if we can fit that into a video somewhere, and see if we can get something like that on our YouTube channel that kind of goes through the generic process, kind of from step 1 to step 10. Start the beginning on that whole process. So that's a good suggestion. We'll definitely consider that as part of our training process.
Okay, excellent. Then we had a couple people asking about the PDF, and we will email everyone that attended today or anyone who registered for the webinar. A link will be included in the email to that PDF, so we will get to upload it on our website. And if you're watching this later on a YouTube recording, I will even put the link to that PDF in the YouTube description so that you can easily access it there. And then we had a question from Richard. It said, I've searched for the X-Rite i1 and cannot find the one you pictured. How do I know which of the newer products from their website will work with Flexi Color Profiler?
The best list is, actually, let's pull that website back up here again. Let's see here. Where did that go? Hold on, let me pull that up here again. See, let's see if I can pull up their website and find out which one's here. That's right. Products. Well, let's see here. I1 family. Okay, so let me pull this over here for you. So I went to xrite.com. I just went on their main page, and then I went to products, and then the I1 family or the I1 Pro 3. These are the two families that work really well with Flexi. So if you click on the I1 family, it pulls you to this one here. And so you can see this is your basic one. It no longer looks like the image that I posted on the picture there. I couldn't actually get a really good picture of this one. It looks a little bit different. You'll see that now it has a black top on it and a gray bottom. So it looks a little bit different. So this is your basic kit on those. And then they have the other ones, which I believe are the Pro 3, which these are the really expensive ones, and they're the automatic ones. So here's a better look at the I1. This is the I1 Pro, the new style. And the difference between the Pro 3 is that I believe that there's some new features to it that they look similar to the regular I1, but they just have the slightly different features to them. I don't know the exact features for each and every one of them, but it does a little bit more. You can probably find the type that I was showing you used or in really good shape. This is the older generation. This is what they used to look like. They do basically the same thing. So if you have any questions, though, all you have to do is go as to which models we support. You can simply go to your color profile under the setup menu, and then I can click just create a profile, and then just skip past this step. You can just hit next and skip past it, hit next, skip past it, and then you can get to this device right here. So you can see that we support the X-Ray I1. This is the older devices, and then these are the new I1 Pro 3, Pro 3 Plus, Pro 3 IO.
In addition to that, Aaron, we
yeah,
also had a question. Rick wanted to know about the new i3 Spectro. Is that supported in Flexi 19?
I believe it is.
Okay, excellent.
Yes, I believe so. Most of the I1 devices are supported by us. You'll notice that in that list of devices, we have a ton of I1 devices. It's because they're the most popular, and so we try and support as many of them as we possibly can. So I was also looking at. There's a few questions from Ken about. Or sorry, was it Ken or was it no? It's Michael about his Latex 570. Using SSO Diffusion. I think it can. It's not that it can't. It's just so the rip that we're using in production or Flexi 19. So if you guys are using Flexi 19, you'll know that when we went to 19, we went to a 64-bit rip, which means it can rip things a lot faster. Well, the new rip does not support the old SSO Diffusion standard. So if you are using an older version of Flexi, like Flexi 8, Flexi 10, Flexi 11, or Flexi 12, you'll still be able to use the SSO Diffusion standard. So they'll still be available. It's only in the Flexi 19 when we switched to the new, faster, more powerful rip that had the limitation of removing the IS of the SSO Diffusion. Which again, it's not a big deal because the software will convert it for you. You guys will probably actually notice that if you import into Flexi 19 a profile that has SSO Diffusion, it will automatically convert it for you. So the conversion process is done for you, and the conversion process won't change the color in your color profile. So you'll be okay there. But any new profile that you create from scratch, that would need to have one of the other dither methods. So, and then I saw a comment here by Stephanie. She said that my ink limit came up automatically to 100%. That's by default. So if I go to my color profiler and I just create a brand new ICC profile, by default, it automatically sets everything at 100%. And that's the way that you want to print it. The first time you print the ink limit test, you want those to be all at 100%, because then you get the full maximum potential of your machine, and then that's where you start limiting it from there. So as you start printing these out, then you back it off of 100. So that is correct. That needs to the first time you print it, it needs to be at 100. So that might have been a little confusing because I had pulled that other profile in and it had different values. Your default values will start at 100%, and that's what you want to print your first one based off of. So that's a good question there, or comment.
Okay, thank you. And then Stephanie did have another question. She said, if I mostly use reflective material, should I use a certain color measuring tool?
You know, I don't think there's any difference in what kind of color measuring device you need. I think it should use the same one, although reflective material can be kind of different. But I don't think that should be a problem. You may want to double check if you do decide to buy a device. You may want to just contact the manufacturer first and say, hey, does this device support reading of reflective? Just because I know that, if anything, that would probably be one of the more difficult ones to read. So you just want to make sure. I'm actually fairly certain that you can, and I have an idea here. Let me just look at something. I believe now there are some advanced settings when it comes to your X-Rite device. And there are, I want to say, some of these settings could help with that, the luminescent value or the degrees. So you'll see this number, the degrees. I believe that the more advanced devices can read the media at a greater extent than others can. So again, I would probably go in before you buy it and make sure, hey, is this actually going to work with reflective material? And if you get the confirmation we're good to go, then Flexi should be able to handle that without any issues, because it's just reading what the machine tells it. So if the machine can't read it, then Flexi will probably give an error or something like that to go along with it. But
okay. And we have one more question here from Matthew. He said, under the characterization tab, which third-party file do I use?
let's pull that up here. So you can do this with the linearization too, and I believe that if you use for the linearization, it's a .ICC, and then when we go to the characterization, I believe it's the same thing. We have to use a .ICC or .ICM. So I do not think. I think the .ICC has to come from either an X-Rite software or it has to come from the ICC or the Flexi profile itself. You'll find that if you're doing a profile for Flexi, it's not super compatible with profiles from another developer. So for example, let's say that I created a profile in Roland VersaWorks. I would have a hard time getting that to work with Flexi and pulling that in, it may not pull it in at all. So typically when it comes to importing, you can import a characterization from a third party, which I believe that if you're using like the X-Write software, it will accept those. Or if you're using like the base Barbieri software, I believe it'll import those. But if you try and go to, let's say, VersaWorks or Rasterlink or another program, I don't think it'll pull the files from those applications because they are built a little bit differently and it doesn't recognize the format per se. So that's kind of where I would say, if at all possible, just use the characterization that's in there. And if you have a profile or a characterization chart that was built in Flexi, yes, it will work. And then the next best thing I would say is make sure that it comes from either X-Write software or the actual scanner software, not a Rasterlink or another RIP software. If it comes from a different RIP software, it probably won't work. That's kind of where things get a little tricky here, is that despite the fact that we're doing the same thing, so Rasterlink, Roland VersaWorks, Flexi, we all use the same .icc format. They are unfortunately not compatible with each other natively. So if I tried to use my Flexi profile with VersaWorks, it wouldn't work. Or if I tried to use my VersaWorks profile with Rasterlink, it's not going to work, and vice versa. So getting it from there might be a little bit tricky. But if you are going to do it, it would have to come from the actual scanner profile software versus another RIP software. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay, excellent. I think that's all the questions we have for today. But thank you once again, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Aaron, for going through all that. We will be sending out the email with the recording of the webinar and that link to the PDF guide that Aaron mentioned. And if you have any questions, we will be having our next event. It'll be next month on, let me see here, June 16th. We'll be talking about the features and functions of the banner finishing tools. So that
also, I'll just throw in a real plug here real quick. Sorry to interrupt you there, Stuart.
Go for it.
You mentioned the next event is going to be next month. If you guys are interested in just learning stuff, you guys may have some extra time. Every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, we do a Flexi Live on YouTube. So you will see it pop up. We always put the video on YouTube after, so if you don't make it, that's fine. You'll see it in that webinar or that Workflow Wednesday. But we choose different Flexi or en route topics. So join us. Watch us live. You'll see me on camera, and we'll just talk about Flexi stuff. So this week, we're actually talking about third-party applications in Flexi. So how do you send a VersaWorks? How do you send a Rasterlink? How do you import a file with a contour cut that already has a contour cut into Flexi and just print it? How do we use the Adobe plugins folder? So we're going to be talking about that. So if you're eager for more content, check us out on Wednesdays. If you can, it's a good opportunity as well.
Excellent. Okay, I think that's everything for today. We hope to see you folks again, and have a great day.